All right, another episode of my Hacking the Singularity series. And this one I want to focus on something about the genie being out of the bottle. And I want to borrow from my experience in information security and particularly the way that viruses and botnets work today. They're often, it could be argued to be AI driven. And they are out of the bottle. So when I say that, what I mean is there's a lot of approaches to AI and how do we control this thing that's getting so smart and could eventually become smarter than us and do us harm. Um, and people look at ways to contain the genie. In one way, the most obvious, and people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, a great thinker, certainly a very smart person, and I love his work. Don't always agree with him, and he thinks that we can just turn the computers off. So there's no way this could happen. Um, for anybody involved in botnets, you know that it's not so easy to shut down malicious code, is it? So we've already seen things from Conficker to Zeus to the Internet of Things, where we have these viruses that got on computers that are spread out to other computers. They'd speak to each other, the botnets. And once they're distributed like that, it's like the whole purpose of going to cloud computing. So we have availability for our data if there's a fire, if there's whatever, some disaster. Well, that's the same thing for malicious code as well. They can borrow from the same concepts. So um, it is out of the bottle. And there's a lot of lessons I think we can learn from botnet research, and particularly how not just do they, once they get out, they're hard to stamp out, but they're not always under the control of the author. And that's an interesting thing to take into account when you consider how AIs work. They're probably set up for one or two reasons. I'm going to borrow from Timothy Leary, who used the term of a selfish meme from an unselfish meme. So when you create something, it's either there to help everybody or it's there to help some, but maybe at the expense of others. And viruses are software that people create that follow the selfish approach that they want to benefit, but even if that means taking somebody else down, and that's probably not cool. All right, so what is a hacker? If you've seen any of my videos before, I don't consider that a bad guy. I'm going from the internet standard definition. It's supposed to be somebody who figures things out and makes something cool happen. You like tinkering with computers, and what's cool, I always say that to me that's the design goal of Buckminster Fuller. Buckminster Fuller felt that it's a very important concept for scientists to realize that when he leaves an artifact behind, the best approach is for the artifact to advantage all without disadvantaging any. And that's it, not just because it's a nice guy. Like a lot of times people think it's me versus you and one of us has got to go down. But to modern scientists, no, that's not a sustainable way to live. You're going to be stuck in this, us versus them type of approach. But if you instead of saying us versus them, we take us versus a house, and the universe is filled. Actually, forget just our immediate solar system. We've got resources that are just beyond our fingertips, and we're getting there. It's just really cool stuff. That's what's cool to me. Technology that advantages all without disadvantaging any. It is very difficult, but that's our goal. And if you're not familiar with the Singularity, I advise you to Google some more stuff on there. Ray Kurzweil's work, or the TED Talks. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there. Singularity University, but it's just based on what's known as Moore's law and how processors double in speed pretty much every year. Some people argue every 2 years or somewhere in the middle. And at this rate, it's expected that their computers are going to reach human intelligence by something like 2023. Now, these are guesstimate numbers, of course. I've seen estimates fail before, but this is pretty reasonable. It seems like a lot of people believe this is quite possible, right? And then it becomes as smart as all humans combined by 2045 or so. Now, when you look at the way growth works, you have either a linear growth or an exponential growth, and an exponential growth, the curve is very severe at a knee. So right about here is like I kind of think of it as this is when it gets as smart as a human, and this is when it's smarter than all humans, and we're right about here, and it's going to get a lot smarter, very, very fast. So we're going to have near, super universal intelligence with us, living amongst us, so to speak. And anybody who's called a help desk knows what it's like to talk to an artificial intelligence. So, well, they're part of our lives now. I've got a Google Home, and okay, Google, blah, 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 blah. It does its best to answer me. Now, when you consider this concept of, are we going to really have this super duper intelligence that's far beyond us, and what will it do with us, in only a couple of years? I find that there's four opinions that basically come out, and I know I fall into all four categories at times. I like to be utopian as much as possible, but my brain will go everywhere, left on its own. So part of me doubts it. Come on. And I do doubt that computers can be human-like, and that they'll sing a song with passion, or love a song more than others for some time period, and then they get over it or whatever. I don't know that that's that part of the brain. I call that the Captain Kirk part of the brain. But you have the utopians. Now, I said I try to be utopian whenever possible because I look at all the problems in the world. And I said a few times, imagine Einstein working on that problem. Imagine somebody twice as smart as Einstein. Imagine somebody 1,000 times. Imagine when somebody's 1 billion times smarter. We're going to have devices, according to Kurzweil and others, whether it's your cell phone, a square device that fits in your rectangular device that fits in your pocket, or is it going to be a nanobot that you swallow? But there's going to be connected somehow, and it'll be in your glasses, and we're going to have access to this device that, in my mind, serves us, and will be smarter than 1 billion Einsteins working together on a problem. And that sounds like a good way to solve a problem. I think it's going to solve a lot of Earth's problems. I hope so. So that makes me somewhat of a utopia. There's the dystopians. And this is what seems to get the Hollywood opinion. You get the Terminator, the robots here. And even in this episode of Star Trek, this thing had gone awry and thought its mission was to wipe out imperfection. And humans were imperfect, but anyway. I have some dystopian thoughts. I do worry that things going awry, just like when I'm on a stupid help desk call, and this AI really doesn't know what it's doing. Yeah. So it's really poorly written. Now, it's not the AI's fault, right? It's always the programmers, garbage in, garbage out. And I do expect anything from Murphy's Law issues where it's just a flaw, and they got it by accident, and it happened. And I expect what's sometimes called Satan's Law, where if there's a vulnerability in a system, there's a malicious entity who's going to take advantage of that to try and gain selfishly at the expense of others. But I find most, for me, or even myself, most of my questions are unanswered. I'm uninformed about most of my opinions here. There's so much to learn. So much to learn. And I think that's where most people are. And I'm hoping by sharing this video and watching other people's videos, we all get smarter as a team. So real quick, how computers work. I make my living as a computer security person. And at a very basic level, you've got some hardware device, right, your phone. You've got an operating system, Android or whatever, iOS, and then you have the apps. Right. Well, the hardware itself has software on it. I mean, it has your phone, when you first boot it up and it says Samsung or whatever, that has a note to load Android, right? So this is software built into the hardware. And of course, you have the hardware person. And all of these things contain millions of lines of code, or potentially. Firmware is probably the smallest. Right? But your operating systems, your applications could be billions and billions of lines of code. And it's hard to put 1 billion pieces of anything together and not have vulnerabilities, not to do it perfectly. You got the best hammer, the best nails, the best wood, but you're hammering 1 billion nails. You might not hammer it in right. Yeah. So there's all kinds of things that could go wrong, all kinds of vulnerabilities on the system. And now these things all talk to each other. We've got more devices talking to each other than we have humans. The AIs are already there, guys. It's already out. We're like, how can we control this? We done it. We've lost control of this. I believe it's out of human control. We can do some things. I'm not saying to just give up. I'm just saying it's like when a captain saves has a ship, where we get the word cyber in the first place, the helmsman of a ship. It comes from the Greek. When you steer through these waters, you know that you can't control the water. You don't give up and just float there. You do your best to steer yourself in that water. And I think that's the answer here. Yeah, how many things are connected? Well, according to studies now, they're predicting that by 2020, we're going to have 50 billion devices. Right? This is firmware. This represents that when they count these things, they're talking about phones and refrigerators and computers. They're not talking about how many apps on that, right? Because when you consider you got one hardware app, but how many one hardware firmware thing, maybe one OS. Some people with laptops and engineers, they might have dual boot with different OSs, but you don't have that on your phone typically. But how many apps do you have on your phone? And they find vulnerabilities in these things every day. Every day. This was yesterday, multiple cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. And just, when you put these things together, you can't put them in perfectly. Not all the I's are dotted, not all the T's are crossed. That's just how it works. So people write malicious code. And a virus, the traditional term refers to code that does something malicious. Now, it could do anything like spy on you. It probably wants your money somehow, or wants somebody's money. That's one of the most famous for criminals. So the ransomware type things. So whatever the virus does, that's its payload. But how do they share them? Now, how do they get on other computers? I mean, it used to be you shared a floppy drive, but now you have to do is get an email from somebody or even less, right? Clicking on a link, whatever, a Facebook message, anything could trigger this thing. And a Trojan is one of the most common ways they spread. When you think you're opening up whatever a funny email, a little applet, there's so many apps on the phones. It's incredible. Or it'd be so easy, whether by accident or not. I mean, Groupon wanted full access to my GPS, to my microphone. Really, for Groupon? Yeah. So there's all kinds of ways these things could get in and what they could do to you. Now, logic bombs are tricky because they only execute at certain times. So just because you don't see a problem, you haven't measured a problem, doesn't mean there isn't a problem waiting to happen and timed. And when people get into your computer, they want to maintain access. That's root level privileges. So these root backdoors, spyware, they turn on the microphone, they turn on the cameras. I mean, how many microphones and cameras do you need in one room to create a hologram of that room? And consider how many families or bars or whatever have multiple people with phones on. And we worry about, well, the American government, we say CIA is doing it, the NSA. Well, whatever the CIA, NSA can do is because the systems are vulnerable to them. And if it's vulnerable to them and the CIA found out about it, what do you think an artificial intelligence that's 1 billion times smarter than us would do with it? So they're there. These bots now talk to each other. Let me give you an early example of a botnet real quick. This is from 2005. 2005, a victim apparently had insulted somebody. He called him a script kiddie, so the story goes. And the attacker said, oh yeah, now we have these command and control servers, that's distributed across the internet, CC servers here and here. And then we have anybody who clicks on the funny email, anybody, it's on your phone, it's on your watch, whatever, it's on your refrigerator, they're infected, they're the zombies. This time they're just computers, but these were the infected machines that were all going to do their bidding. And this particular attack was able to use other network infrastructure, including the Internet core routers, which have the fastest pipes on the Internet. So this is the old drinking from a fire hose metaphor, the digital equivalent of that. And they were able to take his provider, a tier 1 provider, Vario, off the Internet for 4 hours, I believe. Yeah, this is a distributed reflected denial of service. And again, if humans can figure this out, now, either you believe that we can create secure firmware, secure operating systems, secure applications on all devices, all the 50 billion devices, or you think you can contain the AIs because you unplugged them. I think you're naive. The genie is out of the bottle. But I don't worry. I don't worry for the same reason that Einstein didn't fully accept quantum theory. Now, I know that Einstein lost these debates, Niels Bohr, and I don't know how much more Einstein actually contributed once he turned 30, but I do like this quote. I'm an agnostic. I don't have enough information. I can only speak matter-of-factly about what I measure, and I can't measure the existence of God. I can't measure if there's life after death. I can only guess, and I like to talk to God, and I like to hear answers. And I don't know, it's my imagination, but I like to believe that there's some type of order, and even if my God's the wrong God or something, or I'm not all the way right, sometimes it's your imagination, Larry, and it's more so than not. I don't know. But I do believe that there's an order, and in a future talk, I'll talk about Timothy Leary's theory of evolution and what that order just might have. Might have some clue, some map for that. All right, live long and prosper, everybody. Thanks for listening.